Hey y'all, welcome to Killer Queens, a true crime podcast. I'm your host, Torella, and like most millennials, I've always had an obsession with true crime. On KQ, you'll find light true crime stories, millennial hypes and gripes, some adult language, and maybe a special guest here and there. Just like a 90s sleepover, we're just a couple BFFs hanging out, so gather round and let's launch right into it. This episode contains discussion of mentions of drug and drug dealing, kidnapping and holding hostage, murder with a firearm, home invasion, and robbery. Probably some bad New York accents. Listener discretion is advised. In May of 2001, Jennifer Stahl and 4 friends were in her apartment in New York City when another man was buzzed in. They didn't know that he had another man with him, and the two were planning on robbing everyone there along with the money that Jennifer was supposed to have. Each man would later claim that the other was responsible, but in the end, all 5 of the others had been shot and left for dead. Investigators worked with the little evidence that they had and were able to identify their 2 suspects. While one would turn himself in, the other would be arrested across the country with the help of America's Most Wanted. And I do want to give a hey girl thanks to Jennifer for requesting this case, and thanks to Mark for writing it up. All right, let us get into it. Today we're going to go to New York City, the Big Apple, the city that never sleeps, the city of dreams, the melting pot, the concrete jungle. New York can be placed alongside Los Angeles, Paris, and Tokyo as cities that are usually considered to be of cultural significance. And generally speaking, these cities are thought to be on the cutting edge of new trends, whether it be in pop culture, technology, music, theater, or food. Speaking of food, New York City is home to world-renowned restaurants. Since 2010, New York City has required restaurants to post letter grades that correspond to scores received from sanitary inspections. Grade cards must be posted where they can easily be seen by people passing by. The NYC letter grades are an A, B, or C system. A indicates that there are most likely infractions on a technical or non-critical infraction, like proper lighting, can of food was maybe had a dent in it, something like that. But when a C is given, we're entering into more dangerous and gross kind of territory, stuff that can make people sick. If you eat there, we don't want that. These can range from improper temperatures of stored goods to evidence of a rodent infestation. And you would think that C is like average, but not here. So just a little word of the wise, don't eat a C restaurant, okay? Don't eat there. When it comes to your more fine dining restaurants and chefs that operate them, there is one rating system that most strive for, and that's a Michelin star. When you hear Michelin, you probably think of the company that makes tires, the big Michelin Man. The same company started to print guides for traveling back in the early 1900s, and back then there were very few cars on the road. So in an effort to boost car sales, which would then boost tire sales, they started these guides which had maps, restaurant locations, hotels, tips on tire repair, replacement, along with locations of mechanics. Isn't it fascinating like how stuff gets started? I don't know. I love that Mark puts this stuff in these episodes. Like, I never would have, would you have known this? I don't think so. Well, I didn't anyway. The guides talked about places that were a little further away, so it makes sense to have a car to get there. The first guides covered France, but soon expanded to include various countries nearby as well. Then they grew more and more and eventually started to give stars to restaurants that gave an exceptional experience. And over time, the Michelin star has become the pinnacle of what a chef and restaurateur strives for. While the star is awarded to the restaurant and not the chef, having one awarded to a restaurant or kitchen that you're in charge of is a huge boost in the career of a chef, right? Like, I was there and it was, the Michelin star stuff. I'm not rich enough to know how many stars. Is it like 5 stars? I don't know. But I have heard Michelin star restaurant before on TV. While a Michelin star will boost a restaurant's reputation globally, there are countless landmark, iconic establishments in New York City. These can range from a fine dining trip back to the 1960s at The Grill to a laid-back burger joint like J.G. Mellon. Never heard of either one of them. There are countless bodegas that sling out sandwiches to order, but one of the most iconic places in the city is Katz's Deli. And this is the deli where they filmed the iconic I'll have what she's having seen in When Harry Met Sally. If you know, you know. Oh my gosh. Also, they don't make Sunday days of the week underpants because of God. So it's been around since the late 1800s, and in the early 1900s changed its name to Katz. A similar deli was the Carnegie Deli, which operated in New York City for decades. The main branch opened in 1937, and they officially shut down business on December 31st, 2016, after nearly 80 years. Like Katz's, Carnegie was a little taste of that old school diner food and service that many people kept coming back for over and over and over. The walls were covered with photos and autographs of celebrities ranging from film, TV, and theater actors, actresses to athletes from different sports. Today, they sell merchandise on their website as well as shipping food worldwide. They will occasionally have a pop-up style restaurant and an event, which is always a welcome sight to people in attendance. It's sad that you can't go there anymore. Like, I never been to New York, you know. Today, we're going to go back to the year 2001 to an apartment that was a few floors above the iconic location of the Carnegie Deli. Specifically, we're going to May 10th around 7:30 p.m. Detectives were initially told that they had a quintuple homicide at Carnegie Deli. So they're thinking the restaurant, not the apartments above it. So when the police get there, it's a whole madhouse, right? Not only did they have the restaurant, which was a tourist attraction itself and always hoppin', but it was right next to the theater where David Letterman filmed his show, which was another landmark in New York City. Always crazy, right? Chaos. There were people waiting outside just to get into the restaurant to eat, but officers quickly closed down the restaurant for the night and kept the patrons there. They wanted to talk to everyone who was in the building. They wanted as many witnesses as they could get. And when the detectives arrived, they were told that there were 2 people who were DOA and 3 likely, meaning the other 3 were not expected to survive. The apartment belonged to a woman named Jennifer Stahl. That evening, she had 4 guests over with her. She had called her friend and hairstylist, Anthony Veeder, I think is how you say his last name. Spoiler alert, he actually survived this shooting. Anthony has worked in the entertainment industry as a hairstylist on movies and television shows. I said that, I put the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable there. Television shows alike. His credits include Men in Black, Sex and the City, Sons of Anarchy, and The Sopranos, to name a few. He still works in the entertainment industry as well as serving several private clients. He's on call for many of his clients. A friend of his said that it might be midnight and he would get a call. Next thing, he's out of bed and he's going over to do the haircut. And that night, he had gone to Jennifer's apartment to give her a trim. He was friends with her. And he said they would barter a little bit, you know, because she sold upscale weed, is what they said. So he'd go over, give her a haircut. He'd leave with a little weed, you know. They worked out well. Rosamond Dane was also there that night. She also survived and had just arrived in New York City that day with her boyfriend / fiance, Charles, who went by Trey Hellawell. They'd come to the city from St. John in the Virgin Islands for a wedding of a friend. Rosamond made and sold jewelry in stores she owns, as well as imports from Indonesia. Trey was originally from Harwich, Mass. There, he had started a music production company, but he'd moved to the Virgin Islands in 1998, where he was working towards getting his captain's license so he could follow his true passion, which was sailing. Also there that night was Stephen King, not that Stephen King, who lived in New York City, but was originally from Michigan. He was an avid musician and skilled at playing the trombone, as well as other instruments, including the guitar. He recorded his own rock music for his band and had brought his guitar with him to Jennifer's apartment that night. And apparently he was like helping her work the door because she would have so many people come hang out at her apartment. And so like she needed help to work the door because she was hosting and hanging out, I guess. Jennifer Stahl was an avid dancer and musician, as well as a lover of the arts in general. And she actually appeared in Dirty Dancing, the movie, as a backup dancer. She had moved to New York City to pursue her dream, which was dance and music stardom. While she went on auditions and did whatever she could to make it in the industry, she never caught that big break that would launch her career. So she transitioned her aspirations from dancing to focusing more on not just making music, but on making music. Kind of, she had built this little recording studio in her apartment, And that's where she would record music. Sometimes her friends would join in with her on recordings and stuff like that. It was really cool. If there's one thing we know about New York City, even 20 years ago, it's that rent prices were and are completely out of this world. Tack on the fact that Jennifer's apartment was in a super popular area of the city, and you can only imagine how much she was paying to live there. She did make money renting out her studio space and helping other musicians, but to supplement it, she turned to selling marijuana. And she would only sell to people or friends or whatever that she knew. So it was either people that she was directly friends with, or it was people that she had met in person through another friend who she trusted. They said she only dealt with high quality weed. She was super selective and careful about who she dealt with. And she did sell to, they said, celebrities and like high-end clientele. At a certain point, a friend of hers told her that she needed to get some protection for when she knew she would be busy. And so that's when she started paying people that she knew to basically work security at the door, be her bouncer, stuff like that. So like I said, that evening, Stephen King was there kind of serving as that security guard. Around 7:30 p.m. on May the 10th, the 911 call came in about a shooting above the deli. That call was actually made by Anthony, the hairstylist. He said that he had been shot and he didn't know if anyone else was still alive. Very quickly, the police arrived because the shooting in that neighborhood was beyond uncommon. As they were going up the stairs to the apartment, they heard a woman talking, shouting, calling for help. They couldn't make out what she was saying, but just by the tone of her voice, they could tell that it was bad. She's going through something. At this point, they rounded the corner of some steps and they saw a woman standing at the top of the next flight of stairs. She was covered in blood, including her face and her hair, and she had her hands behind her back. Now, they didn't know who she was. They didn't know if she was a victim or a perpetrator. Or was she possibly a decoy to get them to come closer, and then somebody else might be laying in wait to open fire or something like that. They ordered her to show her hands, but she didn't, and she couldn't. As they told her again, she fainted, and when she hit the ground, they saw that her hands were bound behind her with duct tape, and the officers rushed to offer aid. Officers entered the apartment and first came to Anthony, who was asking for help. Then they found two bodies laying in pools of blood, and these were the bodies of Trey and Stephen. They moved to clear the apartment and came to the recording studio where they found Jennifer still alive, but struggling to breathe. She was barely alive. All five were bound with duct tape and had been shot in the head. Anthony survived because the bullet did not penetrate his skull. It actually entered, like he said, it kind of entered here behind his ear, followed the curvature of his skull, and then came out at his occipital bone. So it didn't actually go in, and that's why he survived. Anthony, Rosemond, and Jennifer were all rushed to the hospital. At this point, the police didn't even know who any of them were. One of the detectives said that, of course, solving the case is their top priority, but at that point, they had to identify these people and then go from there. They talked with some of the employees at the deli, and they learned that the apartment belonged to Jennifer. An employee said that he had seen two black men running away around the time that everything happened. One of them had dreadlocks, and the two men got in a red car and sped away. Man, if that doesn't come back up in a big way. So that's where they started. So they're able to identify everyone. They talk with friends of Jennifer's. And by this time, unfortunately, Jennifer had passed away at the hospital. But Rosemond and Anthony were clinging on to life. They told detectives about Jennifer's boyfriend, who was a drummer. He happened to be a black man with dreadlocks. They also told them that their relationship was volatile and it could get physical. And in fact, Jennifer had a cast on her arm because they had gotten into a fight only days before this. And, she'd had the surgery a couple days before this, but they had gotten into a fight. She tried to leave. He grabbed her arm so hard that it broke her wrist. Broke one of her fingers. Like he grabbed her wrist and arm so hard that it broke one of her fingers. And so she ended up having surgery on that. So she had like a cast brace on her arm at the time that this happened. And her friends definitely thought, okay, he's put hands on her. She just had surgery for this. they felt like it was him. And he matches the description, a black man with dreadlocks. So detectives track him down. They talk with him. He was able to give an alibi. It was corroborated by other people. There was no evidence that connected him to the crime in any way. He was cleared. Back in the apartment, the investigators are going through everything, and they definitely noticed that she was selling weed. There were jars, oh my God. There were jars of flowers, scales, everything you would expect. And they could tell that it was pretty high quality stuff. So it was likely that she was making pretty good money, right? They discovered, like I said, that her clientele was varied. Some people that she was friends with, but it also included celebrities, high profile people, stuff like that. So at this point, they ruled out her boyfriend. And in talking with friends, they learned that Rosamond and Trey were just at the apartment that night visiting because they were in town. Trey had called his sister earlier in the day and joked that he was back on the mainland and he was going to try to get up to Boston to see her. They were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, which is awful. They were in town for a wedding of Rosamond's friend. Trey had never even met Jennifer until this time. Rosamond was friends with Jennifer. They were just going to stay the night with her. It's so sad. Anthony was there, remembered to hang out and give Jennifer a haircut. Stephen was there working the door as security. He was helping Jen for extra money because he and his girlfriend were expecting a baby. That was one common thing that they heard about Jen, though, that when she knew somebody that needed extra money or some work or she needed help, she would always go out of her way to help them out. In their investigation, detectives discovered that there was a security camera set up on the stairs of the second floor. And they pulled the footage and the camera wasn't working that night, right? Because it never is. Y'all, it worked. Y'all, that camera worked. Okay? So they pull up the footage and here come these two dingleberries walking up the stairs. If you're going to go rob somebody and then you shoot 5 people in the process, are you not going to look for cameras in a stairwell? I don't know. Maybe not. So anyway, they don't look, they just go and their faces are just right on the camera. So they pull the footage and they saw 2 men walking up the stairs right before the time of the shooting. And when they're walking up, they're not in a hurry. They don't seem rushed. They don't seem stressed, anything like that. They're just walking up the stairs. One had close-cut hair, the other had dreads, but when they're leaving, you can tell now they're in a hurry, they're running down. One is carrying a backpack they didn't have beforehand. Investigators now think that this was a robbery or maybe a deal that went bad. And they say that it lines up with how Jen was separated from the others because they likely moved her to make her tell them where she had the drugs and the money stashed in the apartment. And given the close proximity to when the shootings took place, they knew that these are their guys, right? They released the security video to the public to see if anyone could identify either of the men, but progress is slow the first few days after the shooting until detectives get a call from the hospital. And at this point, Anthony and Rosamond have recovered enough to talk to them. And they told the same story. They're all in the apartment hanging out, they're talking, socializing. The buzzer for the door rings, and Stephen talks with them on the intercom. And the man on the other end says, it's Shawn. So Stephen says, hey, Jen, it's Shawn. And she says, that's fine, buzz him up. So Jen knew who this person was. She obviously trusted them to come up. He didn't say he had another person with him, right? They're just expecting Shawn. But when he came up, he has somebody else with him. And as soon as they walk in, they say, we're here to rob the place. They pull out guns. Rosamond tried to run, but was caught by one of the men, and she was pulled back in and thrown against a wall. The men told everyone to lay face down, and then one of them started to duct tape everyone as they lay there, while the other one took Jen to the studio. Rosamond said she heard Jen say, just take what you want, don't hurt anybody, please don't hurt my friends. And after that, they hear a gunshot, and then another, and another. And since she and Anthony were both face down, they weren't able to see who it was that was doing the shooting. Anthony was shot, but he was still alive and he played dead. Rosamond was the last to be shot. And she said that as she was being shot, she was like, if it's the last thing I do, I'm going to turn around and see who it is that's shooting me, because she doesn't know who these people are. So she turned her head right as the shot was being fired. And that made the bullet graze her head and it saved her life. And then they leave. So they leave. Anthony calls 911. Rosamond saw Trey laying dead and ran out of the apartment, and that's when the police found her on the steps. Trey was her fiance. I just can't imagine. And she heard the shot that killed him, and she knew that the shot next was coming for her. You know, like, oh my gosh. At this point, the police focus on the only name that they have, and that's Shawn. So they release the name to the public, and one of Jen's friends immediately makes a connection. She says that she has a resume from a man named Shawn Sally. Jen had told Shawn to give this friend his resume because she worked in the music industry and he was looking for work. So she said, give this person your resume. Maybe she can find you something, right? So they told the detectives, they give them the resume, and they learned that he was a roadie for George Clinton and his band. They estimated that Sally was the one who had purchased weed for the band, and so that's how he ended up meeting Jen. They spoke with members of the band and learned that he had been fired a year or two prior because he assaulted another member of the crew. They pulled Shawn Sally's arrest record and learned that he had arrests in other states, including arrests for robbery and weapon possession. They looked at his mugshot and compared it to the footage they had, and when comparing it, they were like, yeah, I think this is one of the guys. In the apartment, they had gathered all the duct tape that was used to bind everyone, and they had fingerprints on some of it. They compared that to Sally's prints on file from his arrests, and it was a match. From his resume, they got an address in Newark, New Jersey, but he didn't live there anymore. They searched the house and didn't find any evidence from the robbery, but they did find evidence that Sally was, in fact, staying there. So he had just fled, I think, at that point. They talked with other residents, and one of them, a man named Dwayne, looked like the other man on the security footage. So they ran his name, and he was on parole in New Jersey. So they brought him into the station to talk. They looked through his wallet and found a piece of paper with the name Dre and a phone number on it. They didn't know the name, but they made a copy of everything in the wallet, and they put that in the file. Dwayne denied knowing Sally, but they knew that was a lie, so they kept questioning him, thinking that he might be the other man they're looking for. As they questioned him further about where he was that day, he said he was refereeing a basketball game at a local school, which was corroborated by the school. But the timestamp on the videotape, there was time for Dwayne to get from the school to Manhattan to commit the murders. At this point, it doesn't mean that Dwayne is the shooter, but they're taking a strong look at him. They kept asking him about Sally and where he might have gone after the murders, and he's like, I don't know. So they get nowhere with him, basically. But he did tell them that he had been in Manhattan, and because he was on parole in New Jersey, he needed permission from his parole officer to cross state lines. His parole officer asked the detectives to hold him so he could come pick him up. And as this is going on, officers are canvassing the neighborhood around the house, and someone tells them that they know Sally and they know some of his friends. She went to the station with them and watched footage from the security camera, and she pointed to the video and said, that's Shawn, and that's Dre. Now, remember, they had a paper from Dwayne's wallet with the name Dre and a phone number. So they look up the phone number, and the name comes back to Andre Smith. Another detective remembers that name as well. And earlier in the investigation, they had generated a list of names for individuals who had gotten a parking violation in the neighborhood around the time of the shooting. Sure enough, there's a car that got a ticket around the same time of the shooting. And that car was registered to Andre Smith. Guess what color it was? You'll never guess what color. It was red. They pull up Dre's criminal history and they find that it's littered with robbery and weapons charges. But like, if you're going to go and rob somebody, do not get a parking violation. What are you doing? I just don't understand. So they go to the address on file for Dre, which is only 3 miles from Shawn Sally's house. Dre was not there, but his girlfriend was. And they asked her to have him call them when he got back. So they waited to see what would happen. They expected him to run, but he actually showed up to the station voluntarily 2 days after that. And he at first denied even knowing Shawn Sally. He denied that he was in the area, but he also couldn't provide an alibi. So they showed him the footage from the camera and the crime scene photos, and they were like, dude, that's you. And he was like, I don't know who that is. It's not me. I don't know that man. I don't know that man. I'm sorry to that man, but I don't know that man. Then one of the detectives was like, what's that song? By Shaggy. It wasn't me. That was this guy. No, that wasn't me. I don't know that. It wasn't me. Like, and he had no problems doing it. It was crazy. So as they're talking with him, the other investigators have pulled his prints from when he was arrested previously. They compare those to the prints that they found at the scene, and bingo bongo, it was a match. At this point, Dre is still denying everything. And then another detective comes in and she talks with him and she's making small talk and she's like, "Oh, you remind me of my brother." And she's like, if you were my brother, I would tell you just to be honest, tell me what you know. She started to kind of, relate to him, and she said she got him talking about his baby, and he started to soften up. So he becomes engaged. He starts leaning forward. Like the other detectives are like, she's got him, right? So she says, if Sally says he's the one that did the shooting, that's the story we'll go with. So we need to hear your story first. And Dre is like, okay, I never wanted this to happen. And one of the other detectives was like, there's the levels of denial that you go through with a suspect. And he was like, first it's no, I don't know anything about it. I wasn't there. And then it's like, well, I know something about it, but I wasn't there. And then it's like, well, I know something about it and I was there, but I didn't do anything. And then it's like, or I didn't see any, it's like all those like, okay, well, maybe I saw something, but I didn't mean to. Okay, well, I meant to, but it was an accident, like that kind of stuff. So he kind of like, well, like the distancing. And then finally he's like, okay. But he does say he didn't have money to get diapers or milk for his baby. So that's why they were going to rob Jen. And Shawn, Sally had come to him and said, hey, I know of a place downtown that belongs to this hippie chick and she has weed and money. We can get it there, right? So Dre says all they wanted to do was rob her. He went into the studio with Jen while Shawn was duct taping everyone in the other room. He said that Shawn wasn't going fast enough, so they ended up switching. And so Dre started taping everyone up, and then Shawn went in the studio. And he said as he gets to Rosamond, like taping her up, he hears the shot, and then he's like, dude, why did you do that? Why did you shoot her? And he's like, well, because she knows me. We have to get rid of her. And then they left, and then Shawn comes out, and as he's walking out, he shoots everybody else. Now, what does that sound like? That sounds like, well, I was there, but I didn't do anything. Also, that doesn't help you. You've already admitted that you were there to commit a robbery, so this is felony murder, which means your ass could have sat waiting in the car and had no idea that anybody had a gun, and you're going to go to jail for murder. So it really doesn't matter. But I'm not sure that I believe that you both had guns and only one of you shot everybody and you just stood there and had no idea what was happening. Like, I don't know. It just sounds like what somebody would say if they were guilty as fuck. He says then they leave. They go back to Newark. They split up. And he's like, I haven't talked to Shawn again. Haven't seen him again. So now they got to find Shawn Sally. So they talk with everybody they can who might have had contact with Shawn. And they're like, call if you get in touch with him, if he gets in touch with you, anything. 5 weeks go by and then they get a call. Sally had reached out to a friend and asked them to wire him money. So they pulled the phone records and they discovered that Shawn Sally was using a phone card to make his calls, which they traced. They discovered that he was making calls from payphones as he traveled from New York to New Orleans. And they see that he's making calls from a local motel and they move in. They go into his room. They found items stolen in the robbery, as well as his personal belongings like his wallet, but no Shawn Sally. They literally had just missed him. And then he stopped using the phone card altogether. So they end up reaching out to America's Most Wanted, and they aired the case on July 14th, 2001. Within 20 minutes of that show airing, they get all these phone calls. And one tip said that Shawn Sally was living in a homeless shelter in Miami, Florida. So the investigators call Miami detectives. They're like, hey, go check this out. They're there interviewing people, and Shawn walks into the lobby, and he sees detectives, and he bolts, gets the fuck up out of there. And they release a police dog on him and he's caught immediately. And they said that the dog, he had bites on his forearm, but he was fine. He got treated, all that. So he admits to participating in the robbery, but claimed that when he was taping Jen up or whatever, the gun accidentally went off and shot her in the back of the head, just like the gun went off and shot everybody else in the back of the head. But this one was an accident. And then Dre was the one that shot all of the others. So like, whoopsie, I didn't mean to shoot Jen. Dre thought that means we're shooting everybody, so he shoots everybody else. Really, it's just a big mix-up if you think about it, He said that he originally went to Dwayne looking for somebody to help him do the robbery, and Dwayne was like, I'm not going to do it, but I will hook you up with Dre. Shawn, Sally, and Dre were both charged with murder in the second degree for the 3 murders, attempted murder in the second degree for the 2 survivors, as well as additional weapons and robbery charges. The trial took place almost a year to the date of the murders. And by the way, I don't know if you heard the date, but this is 2001. So in between all of this, 9/11 happens. I mean, I can't imagine being obviously anybody in New York City, but these detectives who are working these horrific cases and all of this, and then 9/11 happens. It's just so sad. The men were tried in the same courtroom, each with his own jury. And the court did it this way so that the survivors would only have to testify once, so that they wouldn't have to testify in multiple trials, because they knew that it would be painful to relive this incident. And I just can't imagine. Each man, of course, tried to pin it on the other one, as they had done in their confessions to the police. Sally claimed it was an accidental discharge, but the evidence pointed to the gun being pressed against Jen's head when she was shot. Both men were convicted on all counts and given 120 years to life. Hearing the sentence was a huge relief for everyone. For the families, it was somewhat a sense of relief, obviously. Nothing is going to bring their loved ones back, but at least these men have been held accountable and they can't hurt anybody else. Trey's sisters said that people weren't jumping up and down and celebrating, but justice was served. One of the detectives says, you're pleased that they were found guilty and sent away, but you're not elated like someone winning the World Series or anything like that, because somebody had to die for this to happen, right? And he says it's hard to put into words the feelings that come with cases like this. And some of the detectives, there's a Netflix show called, let me scroll up, Mark wrote it down. I think it's called Homicide New York. Yes, Homicide New York. This is season 1, episode 1, the Carnegie Deli Massacre. And some of the detectives in that episode, and this is over 20 years ago, are still very choked up talking about it. I mean, it has profoundly affected them. And, just because they've also gotten to know the families of the victims through this and all of that. And obviously a lot of detectives, have a hard time for a long time after, but it was sad. So that's the Carnegie Deli Massacre. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know if you've watched the Netflix thing on it. And I love you guys. Catch you next week. If you like this episode, be sure to like this episode and follow the show so that you never miss out on new episodes. Get in on the conversation on Facebook and Instagram. You can find us at Killer Queens Pod, or you can join our Facebook discussion group at Killer Queens Podcast, where we discuss cases covered on the show and all things 90s. If you want to submit a case to be covered on the show, visit killerqueenspodcast.com/case submission and just complete the form. And if we cover the case, we'll give you a shout out on the show. Lilas.